Hello and good morning to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, 103.5 live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to help look behind the headlines of the stories that make our community tick. Susan Bysiewicz make Connecticut tick and New Haven. She's our lieutenant governor, and she's busier than ever, even though we're amid, or maybe because we're amid, a COVID-19 public health crisis. Susan has made time to join us by Zoom this morning. Susan, welcome back to Dateline New Haven.
It is nice to be with you virtually.
Yeah, it's nice to see you very much. And I know you've been busy. And I wanted to ask you about that. We're going to talk a lot about the census today. We're going to talk a little bit about how much people can get some of this aid that's being funneled from Washington to Hartford, but that last mile, like the last mile when you get off a train and have to get home, that last mile of how we're going to get it in people's hands. The first thing I wanted to ask you, Susan, even though you've been participating in a lot of virtual town halls and other online activities pretty much every day, you're out somewhere in public. You look like you're not sick. So how are you doing that?
I'll tell you that about 2-3 weeks ago, the Commissioner of Public Safety, Jim Ravella, ordered the governor and I not to be in the same place together. That was sobering because we are in a small state, and in normal time, the governor and I would be out in different parts of the state, but usually once or twice a day, we'd find ourselves at the same event, at a meeting together at the Capitol. So it's a different world. And even if you compare a snowstorm, normally if we were having a bad snowstorm or a bad weather issue, the governor and I would be together with all of our commissioners at the command center in the state armory around a big conference table. And we're doing virtual conference calls every day with the governor, Josh Jabal, and the National Guard and all of our commissioners. So life has changed in a very dramatic way for people who are in government. The other, part of my job as lieutenant governor is presiding over the state senate, and this is normally what I would be doing a good part of the time in April and May.
Right.
And we haven't had any sessions since we passed the bond package, I believe, on March 5th. So I have been doing public events, but they've been outside, and they have been 6 feet away. And even the media, I find this interesting, even the media has changed. Look how we are doing this interview. But what I think is interesting is, even if you go outside and you're doing a TV interview, the TV guys have like giant selfie sticks that are 6 feet long with the microphone at the end of the stick. So it's
What's that like for you? You're used to being up close. You're really a retail politician, in my opinion. You go to every town in the state.
I'm a people person, and so my life has changed a lot in that during any given day, I'd be at a hearing at the Capitol, have big meetings in my office. At the end of the day, go to a charitable event with lots of people, or go to a Chamber of Commerce event or a political event. And all of that life as usual has been postponed to a later point. So
What about the Senate, Susan? We're going to have to, by law, complete the session, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, fortunately, it's not a year when you have to pass the budget, because that's biannual. Will that be done virtually? Will you be presiding over the Senate next month virtually?
I do not. We don't know. The governor and I are sort of reassessing as we go forward. The session was supposed to end at the beginning of May. Honestly, I cannot think of any emergency legislation that needs to happen, because the governor has these extraordinary executive order powers. So I'm not aware of any issue that needs to be dealt with by the General Assembly. And I'll say this, the governor was looking at ways to have a bond commission meeting using the telephone instead of getting the dozen people that need to be at that meeting together in one place. So that's something that's going to happen. We had approved bond funding, but a bond commission meeting that the governor calls needs to happen. So we're still trying to figure out whether you could do that telephonically. So
Listening to you, Susan, I had a thought. In this crisis, I'm wondering if liberals and conservatives alike can point to temporary new realities and say, I told you so. Let me tell you what I'm thinking.
Okay.
All of a sudden, the US Senate, 95 senators vote for paid family leave. Something conservatives said was a terrible idea, we should never do. They're giving more aid to people in need that we used to fight about to the end for every cent, like food stamps and all that. So liberals are saying maybe this will change the discussion permanently about what are the realities that people need and how government should help them. And conservatives would listen to you a minute ago and say, although remember, this is an off budget year. And also, as you pointed out, the governor has emergency powers you don't usually have. So I'm not making this argument. But a conservative could listen to you and say, hey, let's not have government ever meet. Government's the problem. Like other people say, this shows how government's a solution. I've even interviewed a libertarian on this show who said, I understand government needs to step in and help people in this situation. And then conservative might listen to Susan and say, well, so don't let the state senate meet. We'll be better off without government will survive. Are we having all of our preconceptions challenged by the new reality? And might that have permanent effect?
I think we are. I think we are. And I'll tell you that people, government leaders, Democrat and Republican, who on a normal day would be having a very robust and healthy dialogue with lots of disagreements, like the governor and I generally do with Republican leaders in the General Assembly. But I will say this, that the governor and Democratic and Republican legislative leaders and I met at the state capitol to discuss whether we would postpone General Assembly activities and whether that was an important public health step to take. And this was, that first week of March, we all sat down. And even though, like on transportation or, early voting, we would be black and white on those issues. But let me say that everybody, whether it was Len Fasano or Themis Claridis, the governor and I, Matt Ritter, Joe A to Z, Joe Arasimowicz, all of us, Republicans, Democrats alike said, we got to protect our people. And we can't have hordes of people coming to the Capitol to discuss the vaccination bill or the right to die bill or whatever.
That's right. We had that big debate for days about whether we should vaccinate people to stop viruses from spreading and killing people.
That's right. And it was, oh my goodness. And literally there were standing room only rooms at the Capitol. I mean, the state Capitol and the legislative office building was a big petri dish. So the legislative leaders agreed, and we all said, okay, we're going to close the Capitol. It's going to get deep cleaned, and everybody's going to stay away from each other. So I think that really highlights how everybody's on the same page.
He said it stunned you when the police commissioner ordered you, public safety commissioner, to stay away from the governor so that our two top officials couldn't both get sick at the same time. Does he have the legal authority to do that? I know you weren't defying.
He wasn't. He wasn't. It wasn't stunned. It was just sobering, right? Because we've been following the course of the pandemic, and now we have. Look, Andrew Cuomo's brother. Who's a media person. Yeah, he's COVID positive. We've had senators, U.S. senators and Congress people and their families that have been infected. So um, I was just sobered by that, and the governor and I just agreed that that would be, a
Yeah.
good thing.
All I meant is that I didn't know is there a statutory authority he has?
There really isn't. It was
So
just
he asked you.
he said, we really have to be smart about this. And I know the governor's been very careful about what he's been doing. And trust me, if we get closer than 6 feet from one another, we'll hear about it either at our email or on our social media. So we're trying to. The governor and I are trying to model good behavior for everybody because
Unlike the president and the vice president, it kind of freaked us all out to see them all together within like a foot or two of their top people.
oh my gosh, absolutely. And so I think you consistently see Vice President Pence and President Trump standing right next to one another, and the governor and I are trying to model better behavior.
And we're speaking to Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysiewicz, who's joining us by Zoom on Dateline New Haven and WNHH FM 103.5, live streamed at newhavenenigma.org. So, Susan, before this all happened, you had taken the lead for the state in trying to make sure that Connecticut counts, that we sign up for the census so that our population is accurately counted and that we get the reimbursements we need that are based on that from the federal government. Now you're even more than ever involved in that now in new ways. How has COVID-19 changed your campaign to make Connecticut count?
Well, it's changed it in a number of ways. On the one hand, you'd say, okay, well, it's more challenging because those face-to-face opportunities that complete count committees, and by the way, since you and I last talked about the census months ago, there are 156 local complete count committees that have been established across the state. So almost every town or city has a complete count committee. And a lot of them were planning in the spring and early summer to get the word out at parades and festivals and big events and to hold community participation events where seniors would gather at a senior center, or people would gather at health centers or basements of churches, and a lot of that kind of activity has been postponed. But what we've said to people is, okay, use your virtual pulpit, use your email network, use your social media accounts, use the telephone, use other means to get the word out that it's really, really important to fill out the census. And so here's where we are, Paul. 37.6% of our households in Connecticut have filled out the census. So we are above the national average. The national average is 36.2%. And I like to say that as of today, which is Census Day, by the way, April 1st is Census Day, that we're 37.6% ahead of where we were in 2010 because we didn't have online or telephone response before in past census efforts. Now we do, but our challenge is, okay, now we need to get the remainder 62%, give or take, of the households to finish the job.
And then in cities, obviously, we're always concerned because we go in smaller numbers. It's hard to find some people. They're off the grid. They're hiding in the shadows.
Right.
And you had been early and often showing up in New Haven to help local people here with that effort. How are we doing in New Haven?
So to date, and if anybody wants to find out, there's a really cool tool on the Census Bureau website. So I check multiple times a day. And it will give the response rates by census tract, by county, by city, uh, and by state. So I looked this morning, New Haven was at 28.3%. So 28.3% of the households in New Haven had responded. And I want to give a huge shout out to Mayor Elliker and Mike Piscatelli and their complete count committee, because they're out working. New Haven is a hard to count area, and they're also at ground zero of this COVID-19 crisis. So I know everybody's got a lot on their plate, and that's
Right now,
why.
Susan, while you and I are talking, there's a 2 hour online Census Day New Haven event with music. And how does that 28.3 compare to other cities in
Okay.
Connecticut
So, by
nationally?
the way, and I'm going to be joining that New Haven event after you and I talk. So, Bridgeport is at 25.4%,
Hmm.
and Stamford is at 34.8%.
Whoa,
Waterbury is at 28.9%. So, our hope is that by getting the message out through mayors and first selectmen, through local complete count committees, through faith leaders, also through the chambers of commerce putting out, using their email list, also the AFL-CIO statewide has 220,000 members, and they've
mm,
been doing videos in different languages with their members and putting those out on social media. The AARP is promoting this as well.
that's
And
great. And in New Haven, obviously, we're always concerned, A, about undocumented people because we need them counted. And also, like in New Hallville, I was told neighborhoods like that, a lot of times the census workers need to be out there physically seeing where there's an electric hookup that's extra to show that someone's in the apartment. And knowing well, now we don't have this problem when people are working the weird hours because of the service economy. You're often working overnight shifts, weird double shifts. That how do you find people when they're home? You just gave a lot of good examples of how people can still use different kinds of tools to reach people. How about those hardest to reach off the
yep.
grid urban dwellers?
So that's why when we created our statewide complete count committee, we included organizations and leaders like Iris and Chris George and Kika Matos and Junta. And we urged each municipality to think about immigrant communities, Black and Brown communities, and trusted voices and leaders in different ethnic and religious communities, so that we can reach out and let undocumented people know why it's really important. And yesterday I was outside across the street from Hartford Hospital with the Vice President of Equity, Sarah Lewis, at Hartford Hospital. We wanted to put a fine point on the fact that federal disaster relief, hospital funding, Medicaid, Medicare are all funding streams that are based on how many people are in our state. So this
Right.
COVID-19 situation highlights the critical importance of going ahead and filling it out. We want people to know that it's safe. The Census Bureau cannot release this information to ICE, to Homeland Security, to any local, state, or federal law enforcement authorities. It's safe to fill out, and it's important.
And it's important to remind you that you listen to Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysiewicz. COVID-19 hasn't stopped her by even a step in her duties with the census and small business in the state. You're listening to her on Dateline New Haven, WNHHFM. Harry Jones, our station manager, is monitoring our Facebook feed. Harry said there are a few questions for the
Okay,
Lieutenant Governor.
great.
Yeah, Rodney actually has a long two-part question having to do with small business contractors, but I'll get to that second. He asked about the census.
Mhm.
Why don't they extend the deadline? Because he heard it's today.
Okay, so so Rodney, thank you for asking. about the deadlines, and let's talk about the timeline. So people have until August 20th to respond to the census. And you have until August 20 to respond online, by phone, or on paper. And people should know if they haven't responded online or by phone in April, so this month, probably mid-month, people will receive the paper form to their home. So please, if you don't have internet access or you're not computer savvy, use the phone or use the paper form and complete the census in one of those ways, Rodney. And everybody should have their census form, paper form, mailed to their home in April. The Census Bureau has extended the deadline for individuals to respond from July to August 20th. And the Census Bureau has put off the door knocking and the person-to-person enumeration activities. Normally in May, those enumerators would start door knocking households that had not completed the census. The Census Bureau has put that off until May 28th. So my message to people in New Haven, use the phone, call the 800 number, go online, or fill out your paper form and do that by the end of April. And that way you won't have to worry about census scams because you'll know you completed the census. So I think that, Harry, I think that answered Rodney's question about the census.
Harry, before we get to Rodney's other question, do you want to see, did anybody else have any questions for Lieutenant Governor?
Well, Patricia Melton, actually, she has a statement. So she says, promise scholars number in a few thousand, but reach into 22,000 households. Our scholars can be those foot soldiers. Have the state identified other far-reaching nonprofits?
I love that New Haven program, and young people can absolutely lead the way on the census. Chris Rosario actually told me a story about how he learned about the census when he was in elementary school and helped his mom, who was from Puerto Rico and spoke Spanish, helped her complete the form. So young people can be the foot soldiers, but we only want them doing that once everyone has determined that it's safe to engage in person-to-person contact. The state of Connecticut is partnering with the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, the New Haven Foundation, and 4 other foundations across the state. They put in $500,000 to do education and outreach on the census in hard-to-count areas. Our state matched with additional $500,000, and our state match also enabled an additional grant of $130,000 specifically to reach kids from the ages of birth to 5. So we've been partnering with nonprofits, not just at the statewide level, where we have over 100 statewide organizations like the NAACP, the YWCA, and many others, but each of our 156 complete count committees include nonprofits, because nonprofits and groups like that listener just mentioned are key and are trusted voices in each community. So,
and what's this thing about that too? And as you know, for our listeners, New Haven Promise is that great organization, New Haven, that gives college scholarships and help guiding people from public schools in New Haven into college. And what Patricia was pointing out too, she was speaking about this the other day, is they're at home with people. They're often the first members of their generation to go to college and to get familiar with technology and how to work loan programs and government programs. So they're often at home now during this crisis with the computer and enabling their households and their relatives' households to tap in. So that's been a blessing. Thank you for listening, Patricia and Rodney, for giving questions to Susan Bysiewicz. Harry, you said Rodney had a second question.
Yeah, Rodney does have a second question, but Ruthie Hosky wants to say good morning.
Okay,
Good morning, Ruthie.
And Bob McCormick asked whether the package stores are going to close as of Sunday.
I'm not aware of that right now. The package stores liquor stores are on the essential business list. And I'm not aware that is changing. And I have to say that the governor and I were asked by a media outlet, so what do you do when you're done with your official activities? And both of us said we go for walks with our spouses and we have dinner with a glass of wine. So I'm hoping the governor's not going to change that.
But why are package stores essential?
I honestly don't know. The Department of Economic and Community Development was charged with coming up with the list. So manufacturing, aerospace, and healthcare manufacturers are on the list. Gun shops are on the list, but people have to make an appointment now. That was one change. Gas stations, banks, there's a whole host of things that are on the list, and I can't share with you. Oh, here's an interesting one. Pet grooming businesses are considered essential. I thought that was a little strange because hair salons and nail salons are not essential, but dog salons are essential. And I was told by the DECD commissioner that it's because animals don't pass on COVID-19. Go figure.
Unless they're bats. Right. Harry, did Rodney had another question for Susan?
Yes, he says, can the governor reach out to find resources for small contractors like myself to get resources to keep business like myself afloat? We need help and we hire in the minority community. I guess he's saying we need help because we're the ones who hire in the minority community. They have a plan for the small do they have a plan for the small minority businesses?
Yes. So a couple things. And Harry, I'm going to assume that Rodney is a minority owned business.
Yes, he's African American. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So there is a program in place. It's called the Small Business Express Program at the state level. That was existing. That was created back after the 2008 the recession, and it prioritizes women-owned, minority-owned, and veteran-owned businesses. That program is still on the books in the state. And when I'm done talking about what programs are available, Rodney, I'm going to give you the Department of Economic and Community Development hotline.
Let me interrupt you real quick because his second part says the bar to qualify for the resources don't allow small Black and brown contractors to receive any funds.
Well, that's not true under the Small Business Express Program. So I don't know what Rodney is talking about, and I'm going to give him the hotline number, and I'm going to also make a suggestion about another organization. So there's the Small Business Express Loan Program, and there are a variety of programs available through the Small Business Administration, some of which give out $10,000 in immediate assistance so people can pay payroll, rent, etc. And some of the loans are forgivable with the SBA. So
But so the first batch was state, and then the SBA is federal, correct? I know you're helping people with the SBA.
Yes.
But you were first talking about Small Business Express. That's you. That's the state of Connecticut.
That's a state program. And there's also a variety of SBA programs. One of them is the 7A loan program that under the CARES Act now has a very low interest rate. It used to be, prior to the CARES Act passing, this disaster legislation, the percentage was 3%. Now it's 0.5%. And some of the SBA loans are forgivable. So what Rodney should do is call this number, 860-500-2333, because there are people standing by. That's the hotline for our State Department of Economic and Community Development. And our Economic and Community Development folks are working closely with the Small Business Administration for the New England region. So folks at DECD know what the federal programs are. They can talk to Rodney and advise him about which is best for him to apply for. And the other thing I'll suggest to Rodney is call the Women's Small Business Development Center, the Women's Small Business Development Center, or the State of Connecticut Small Business Development Center. Those two organizations are nonprofits, and they help small business. And they'll do it regardless of gender. Women's Small Business Development Center, doesn't matter if you're a guy, they'll help you too. Also, the State of Connecticut Small Business Development Centers, they will help you. They'll walk you through the online application process, the 7A process. They'll help you figure out what's best for your particular type of business and your situation. They're great. Paul, I've done a number of town halls with Mark Hayward of the SBA and Fran Pastore, who runs the Women's Small Business Development Center. So they're both great, and they are both poised to help people. So call that 860-500-2333.
Thank you, Ronnie, for your question. Susan Bysiewicz, Lieutenant Governor on Dateline, New Haven. Susan, do you have 5 more minutes? You need to run.
I do.
All right. So, Susan, one thing you came into office to focus on as Lieutenant Governor was to help build small business statewide, in part, not just doing what you just did, how to access resources that are there, but how to open up international markets, how to find customers abroad. COVID-19 has added a new element to that discussion. And this is, again, a bigger picture question I want to ask you. Just like liberals and conservatives can both look at the temporary new reality to see long-term changes in how we think, the way the globe is connected economically has been a hot button issue in politics. There have been those who have pushed nationalism, breaking up the EU through Brexit, trade tariffs, Donald Trump supporters saying this shows we need to have more domestic production. If we were making more masks and here in this country, we wouldn't have had such a shortage. And then other people would say, I'll admit, like me, say that this crisis is showing how interdependent we are, how the world has gotten smaller through technology, and that not only are we going to spread germs faster, but we're going to spread solutions to our challenges more by working better together. That's the backdrop I want to ask you. How has this affected your efforts to tie our local economy to the global economy, to finding foreign customers for our business? Is that going to become harder or easier with the fallout of this crisis?
Yeah. So I'll just say that and I haven't had any virtual meetings with consul generals and ambassadors to our top trading partners, but that's something that I've been doing over the past year, meeting with the Chinese consul general, the German, the French, the UK, and on, to try to build these partnerships. And the governor and I have both been doing this. And our international travel, for instance, the Paris Air Show is something that in June one of us would be doing. I think, that's probably off the list. And I know that, for instance, Denise Merrill was in Australia on a business outreach mission with Ann Evans, who is part of the Federal Chamber of Commerce, and Ann and the Federal Export Center. Ann had to come back when President Trump ordered, those travel restrictions. So that's put a damper on it. I'll say this. Number one, I've been so impressed with the adaptability and the creative ability of our entrepreneurs. I've read a bunch of different news stories just about two women in the Deep River, Essex area that have just started the production of facial masks for healthcare workers. We've got UTC stepping up to make ventilators. Our companies are stepping up. At the same time, I'll tell you, just this morning, I had a conversation with someone who was sourcing 1 million N95 masks from China. So China's, I think, on the downward spiral of their COVID-19, and now they're producing things for us. So we're having American producers step up, but we also need. We're dependent on other countries as well. And I'm glad.
I got that. We're talking to Pedro Soto's charge of Connecticut's aerospace manufacturing industry, a lot of small businesses, and they responded immediately to Yellow Haven Hospital for other kinds of masks because their supply lines are also international, and that hospitals and other big purchasers couldn't tap some of these supply lines because of this crisis, and these other manufacturers have them. And that's kind of what made me think about my question for you long term. You were just talking about the short term, and it is an inspiring story, an important story. Long term, as you continue your efforts to strengthen our economy locally by having international contacts, will this effort produce long-term opportunities that might not have existed before?
I hope so. I will tell you that at the state level, we have people, a team of people who have been spending, 18 hours a day working to source PPE equipment for hospitals. The governor and I were told yesterday on our daily call, that the national stockpile is totally depleted. So no more national stockpile of ventilators. Yeah. And so that's why we have our state purchasing folks feverishly placing orders. But they're doing it after they vet companies, because there are a lot of unscrupulous people who are trying to take advantage of this situation.
Right.
But it's
All right. And do you have time for one more question from a listener?
Sure.
All right. Hi, thank you, Susan. Harry, we have another listener question?
Okay, this is from Jorge Cabrera. Hi, Susan. Thank you for all your hard work for Connecticut. Are there any conversations occurring to consider designating frontline grocery workers as first responders? We started a petition to seek support for our hardworking grocery workers who are on the front line.
So, George Cabrera, nice to hear from you. And so the answer is yes, the governor and I are working on that. And let me just say a huge thank you to the people who are on the front lines, nurses, doctors, medical personnel, but also people like our grocery store workers, our pharmacy workers. They are literally on the front lines, and we want to make sure that they have protective equipment, because they're out in dealing with the public in a very personal way. The folks who work in banks as well, gas stations, all these folks are important. And yes, we are making sure that people like our grocery store workers, our bus drivers, have the protective equipment. that they need, and that they are recognized as frontline first responders, if you will, because what they do is critical. And George, the governor, and I were proud to work with you when Stop and Shop went on strike. And it was amazing how members of the community rallied to boycott Stop and Shop, whether it was in Hamden, New Haven, Woodbridge, Middletown, Simsbury, wherever you went, the Stop and Shop parking lots were empty while you folks were on strike. So, I want you to know how grateful the governor and I are of all of our grocery store workers who are putting their selves at risk, but making
Good
sure.
question, George. And I'm grateful to you, Susan Bysiewicz, for joining us today on Dateline New Haven and for giving us the extra time. WNHH-FM. Thanks to people who listen and sending questions. Susan, I wish you luck. I hope you stay healthy.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're out there, but we want you to stay healthy. One thing I love about Susan Bysiewicz, she can come on every local radio show. And when people call in, she will have met most of them because she's hit over the last few decades, has shown up in all 169 cities and towns in our state. So thanks for joining us today on WNHH-FM. Thanks to our guest, Susan Bysiewicz, Lieutenant Governor. Thanks to Harry Brose, the miracle man behind the controls, our station manager. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free, from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us day and night here at WNHH-FM, your home for community radio.